Hello everyone. My name is Dr. Pranav Pandya and I'm a second year PG student of chest medicine. Today I'm going to be telling you a little about tuberculosis. I'm going to try to make this like a story from the time the first patient approached to us till how he was diagnosed, how he was started on treatment, what follow-up he took, and how did he decide to stop his treatment, and all the possible challenges that could have come in between during each and every of his follow-ups. We'll try to make it like a story. So let's start. A patient comes to us in the OPD with the classic manifestations of tuberculosis, such as dry cough or productive cough lasting for more than 2 weeks, fever with evening rise of temperature. Now, why is this evening rise of temperature significant? Normally, under physiological limits, also the diurnal variation in temperature is more in the evening. This diurnal normal physiological variation is just exaggerated because of the TB bacilli, and hence you get evening rise. Since you get evening rise, patients usually take an antipyretic, so it leads to night sweats. Because of evening rise of temperature and post fever effervescence, you will get night sweats in the night. Also, the patient will be very commonly presenting with appetite loss and weight loss since more than 2 months. And a common symptom is blood-tinged sputum or frank hemoptysis, frank blood in cough. Now, why does this happen? TB, as you know, is a condition of the lung parenchyma, and every bronchopulmonary segment is supplied by its own blood supply and its own airway. Now, if there is a original Gron's focus in the lung parenchyma, which invades into the surrounding bronchial artery, it will cause invasion of the vessels and subsequent hemoptysis. This aneurysm, because of invasion of the parenchymal focus into the surrounding vessel, is known as an Rasmussen's aneurysm, which when ruptured can lead to blood-thinning sputum. Also, 80% of the circulation of the pulmonary system is because of bronchial artery, which is a sub-branch of the aorta, so it is high pressure circulation. So in case it invades, and this is the reason, and it can lead to a very massive hemoptysis, so it needs to be considered. So after taking proper history and making sure it is a TB suspect patient, what investigations will you give the patient? First, you will make sure that on the first OPD visit you give him a MON2 test. MON2 is a diagnostic test for TB. It is a kind of a skin test in which you have to inject 0.1 tuberculin units or 0.1 ml of PPD, partial protein purified derivative of tuberculin. You have to inject it in the ventral aspect of the forearm. You have to make sure there is a bleb, it has to be intradermal, and you have to mark a circle around it and write the date on which you have given it later, because the reading has to be seen exactly 48 hours later. So you have to counsel the patient to come exactly after 48 hours, not come after 24, and not forget to come after 2 days, but exactly at the end of 48 hours it has to be read. Also, at the same time, at the first OPD visit, you will ask him to do a chest X-ray of the chest X-ray with the posterior anterior view. In that, you are expected to find patchy inhomogeneous consolidation or opacities predominantly in the upper lobes. Small calcified granulomas can also be observed in the hilar regions, but most commonly bilateral upper lobe patchy inhomogeneous opacities. Once you send the patient away for the routine follow-up for 2 days later for the MON2 reading, you have to make sure that you send him with 2 small boxes and 1 Falcon tube for sputum analysis. The microbiological diagnosis is very important. Cannot start treatment just based on empirical evidence. It has to be microbiological evidence. So, why 2 sterile containers? Because the rate of shedding of acid-fast bacilli or the TB bacilli is variable. It's not necessary that in the first expectorated sample you will get the maximum yield. So you have to explain to the patient that you take minimum 2 samples, 1 expectorated at night and 1 expectorated early morning. Early morning sputum is always the best. It is advisable if the patient is unable to expectorate, you add a mucolytic and an expectorant to his treatment. You ask him to take inhalation with steam, which will cause him to cough and expectorate it easier. You send him back with this and you ask him to follow up after 48 hours for the MON2 reading. Okay, so now it's been 48 hours. The patient has come to you again for a follow-up for his MON2 reading. On observation, you see that the patient has some swelling, redness, erythema or an induration to see if it is significant result or not. Now, MON2 is essentially a type 4 hypersensitivity reaction. Type 1, atopy, type 2, antibody mediated, type 3, immune complex deposition, antigen-antibody interaction mediated, and type 4 is delayed hypersensitivity caused because of cell-mediated immunity. So MON2 test is basically just testing whether the person has developed cell-mediated immunity against the exogenous TB bacilli. Also cell-mediated immunity. Okay. Now, If the patient is an HIV positive patient, if he has chest X-ray changes done on the first OPD visit suggestive of old TB, such as calcified lymph nodes or fibrotic areas, or he is a recent post-organ transplantation patient, which is immunosuppressed and he is on further immunosuppressants. In such categories of patients, any induration, redness, swelling more than 5 millimeters on the MOT2 reading is considered as a positive MOT2. Second category of patients, DMC lab workers, designated microscopy centers, personnel, microbiologists, technicians who work with continuous sputum microscopic examinations. They are obviously more exposed. So, such workers and people who have recently arrived from high prevalence countries to India in less than 5 years, such patients, and generally immunosuppressed patients because of various comorbidities like CKD, diabetes, hypertension, end-stage renal disease, cancer patients. In all these categories of patients, any reading more than 10 millimeters is considered a positive MOT2. While in the last stage, if there are none of the above risk factors, if the patient is not an IV drug user, if the patient is not a child below the age of 12 years of age with a positive contact with an adult, in all these patients, only 15 millimeters is taken as a cutoff. Anything less than that is considered negative, since the patient has no other risk factors. In India, we deal maximum with recent contacts because TB is so widely spread that you have some contact. And this, since India itself is a high prevalence country, it is a TB capital of the world, and hence these two patients are the most common risk factors. Hence, for all practical purposes, we consider more than 10 millimeters as the general cutoff that a MOT2 is considered positive.
Now, when the patient presents to you with his sputum samples in 2 containers as well as in 1 falcon tube, you are supposed to refer him to the nearest designated microscopic center, which we have at our place in Srimati Kashibai Navle Medical College, or a medical center. Or in case the patient is a person living with HIV, PEL HIV, then you send him to an integrated counseling and testing center or an antiretroviral therapy center. You have to fill the personal details, with the mobile number being very important so as to trace the patient, and the address. The key populations: a person living in a prison, a minor, a migrant worker, an urban slum, where the areas of population density is very high, so there is much more chance of TB getting spread. After entering all these details, you have an option. It is either sputum or another sample. What other samples can be tested for TB? Pleural fluid, gastric lavage, cerebrospinal fluid, abscess, pus. Especially in children below the age of 1 who are unable to expectorate and who have post-tussive vomiting as a very common symptom instead of productive cough. In such patients, the gastric lavage is indicated to test for TB bacilli. Once you send this to the referring center, they get back to you with either a report for microscopy or CBNAT, that is cartridge-based nucleic acid amplification test, or line probe assay. Through microscopy, all you can detect is whether acid-fast bacilli are present or no. It does not tell you whether those acid-fast bacilli are Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Hence, to find out that, you need to send the patient for CBNAT testing, which is cartridge-based nucleic acid amplification test, which requires the patient's sample to be put in a falcon tube. The DMC or the ICTC or the medical college lab technician will undergo ZN staining of the sputum sample, which is Ziehl-Neelsen staining. And as we know, Mycobacterium tuberculosis are 20% acid fast, meaning that they resist decolorization of their original pink color by 20% concentration of sulfuric acid. So they will always be visible as pink under the microscope. Once that is given, they'll give a report on the microscopy as scanty 1+, 2+, or 3+, according to the number of bacilli seen in 100x power fields on the microscope. If the patient turns out to be AFB positive, he is subjected to the CBNAT testing, in which you can come to know whether the AFB is actually Mycobacterium tuberculosis, whether it is detected or not detected, and if detected, whether that sputum sample has resistance to rifampicin, which is a first-line drug of anti-tubercular treatment. If it shows resistance to rifampicin, then it has to be tested for further first-line ATT drug resistance. But if it is not detected, it can be treated as rifampicin-sensitive TB, and treatment can be initiated immediately. Also, it is always advisable to undergo 2 further tests once the AFB are seen, which is AFB culture and line probe assay. AFB culture is when the acid-fast bacilli are subjected to growth on the LJ medium, that is Lewontin-Jensen medium, and the results are obtained after 6 weeks. However, on this we can find if the non-tubercular mycobacteria are also growing along with it. The first line probe assay test, the machine will give you details as to whether there is resistance against rifampicin as well as INH, which is isoniazid, which are the first two first-line anti-tubercular drugs. A mutation in the RPO-B gene or the CAT-G gene or the INH-A gene will report whether there is resistance to either rifampicin or INH together. As you know, MDR-TB is defined as resistant to both rifampicin and INH and not or. It has to be compulsory resistance to both drugs together. So in that case, we have to go for second line LPA as well as individual drug susceptibility testing for all the available drugs, including SLI, that is second line injectable agents, fluoroquinolones, and the other drugs. If we subject the sputum to this test, we will realize whether the sputum sample is resistant to each and every of these first line and second line AKT drugs or no.
Okay, so now we've established the fact that the patient has a sputum having AFB positive, his CVNR revealed Mycobacterium tuberculosis, as well as resistance to rifampicin was not detected, so it is rifampicin sensitive. The first line LPA revealed no RPOB, no CAT-G and no INH-A mutation, meaning that the patient is sensitive to rifampicin as well as INH. So it's not MDR, nor is it a monoresistance. AFB culture after 6 weeks revealed that the growth was Mycobacterium tuberculosis and not non-tubercular mycobacteria. Once all this is established, you have established that the patient has drug sensitive or a rifampicin and INH sensitive TB. Final diagnosis. So, before you start treatment, you have to make sure you do some baseline blood investigations, like you send the patient's HIV, HBsAg for hepatitis B, random blood sugar, liver function tests with enzymes, and renal function tests with electrolytes. All this you make sure that the patient gets, and after all this is done, the patient will have a specific NICSHI ID generated to his or her name, after which you can start the treatment safely. Okay, so finally we are ready to start treatment for that patient. First, you ask that patient to get their weight done, because according to the National Tuberculosis Elimination Program, the fixed dose combination of the blister packets is supposed to be given according to weight. So there is a category of 25 to 34 kgs, 35 to 49 kgs, 50 to 64 kgs, 65 to 75 and more than 75 kgs. This is important because the number of pills to be given according to the fixed dose combination differs based on the weight. Now, each fixed dose combination pill, you must have seen those blister packs. Treatment for TB is initial intensive phase for 2 months and continuation phase for 4 months, making a total of 6 months duration of treatment. The first blister packet is red in color, which is supposed to be given throughout the intensive phase. It consists of 4 drugs. Each pill contains 4 drugs, fixed dose combination of 4 different drugs, which are the first line AKT drugs. Now, what do you mean by first line AKT drugs? First line AKT drugs mean that the drugs which are the most potent, least toxic and most tolerable. Second line drugs are less tolerable, more toxic and less potent than the first, hence they are called second line drugs. So, HRZE, isoniazid, rifampicin, pyrazinamide, ethambutol. Isoniazid 75 mg, rifampicin 150 mg, SED 400, E 275. This much is the concentration of each fixed dose combination pill. If you see the ratio, if this is X, this is 2X, this is 5.33X, and this is 3.66X. This can be equated in terms of milligrams per kg body weight in such a way that 4 to 6 milligram per kg body weight, 8 to 12 per kg body weight, 20 to 30 per kg body weight, and 13 to 16 per kg body weight. To simplify this, there is a simple formula that 5, 10, 25, 15, all multiples of 5, 5, 10, 25, 15, you multiply this with the normal weight of the patient. So if a patient wishes to get himself enrolled under the NTEP, that is the government scheme, then he has to be given fixed dose according to the weight band, that's it, of the FDC. However, many private practitioners and people who wish to take private treatment, they need to be given these doses with this ratio in mind. 5 into kg body weight, 10 into kg body weight, 25 into kg body weight, and 15 into kg body weight. Okay, now so let's try and reconstruct an actual timeline. On day 0, the treatment was started. You ask the patient to follow up on day 4. Day 1, day 0, day 1, day 2, day 3. You're supposed to take pills for 4 days and follow up on day 4 with a repeat fresh LFT with enzymes. Because pyrazinamide and rifampicin, both of them are highly hepatotoxic, so it is very likely that the patient will develop some kind of hepatotoxicity or ATT-induced hepatitis if not checked in the first 4 days. So get an LFT done on day 4. If it is normal, continue treatment. Then the patient is asked to come for the first routine follow-up at day 28. That is after 1 month of eating or after 4 weeks of eating the pills. 1 month or 4 weeks or day 28. When the patient comes to you, you check his weight gain. You check whether he is developing any side effects or no. You ask him leading questions. And if everything is fine, you have to take the pills for the next month because the IP lasts for 2 months. HRZD for 2 months. Then he'll come to you again at day 56, which is 2 months or 8 weeks. At that time, you have to check his weight again. Very important. You have to do his repeat sputum microscopy to check whether there is disappearance or absence of acid fast bacilli or no. If the acid fast bacilli have not disappeared, then you are supposed to extend the IP till it disappears. If they have disappeared, it is safe to stop the IP and switch over to CP. So further continuing the timeline. So on day 57 of the treatment or day 1 of the CP, CP consists of 3 drugs, H, R and E according to the weight band or according to 5, 10, 25, 15 into the kg body weight if it is a private practitioner dose. You start CP a month later on day 28 of the CP or day 84 of the total treatment. Again, you come for the routine follow-up where you will ask the patient you check the patient for weight gain and for taking the next month's pills. Day 11, day 112 of the total treatment or day 56 of the CP, same thing, just take the few next month's treatment. Day 140 of the total treatment and day 84 of the CP, same. Finally, day 168 of the treatment or day 112 of the CP phase, you are supposed to check weight gain, total weight gain over these 6 months. You are supposed to do the chest X-ray PA view to see if a complete total radiological resolution has occurred or no. Once that has occurred, there is adequate weight gain, the patient is asymptomatic, and the final sputum AFP culture sample is again negative. That's when you can decide whether it is time to stop the treatment or not. So, totally, for rifampicin sensitive and INH sensitive pulmonary TB, without any complications, without any side effects, the entire treatment duration will be IP plus CP, making the category 1 EKT, 56 days or doses of IP plus 112 days or doses of CP together make 168 doses or days of category 1. This is also 2 months or 4 months, which is also equal to 8 weeks or 16 weeks, making a total of 6 months or a 24-week treatment of category 1 antitubercular treatment. At any point in the course of the disease and the course of the treatment, the patient can present you with the classic side effects of antitubercular drugs. Let's discuss a few of them. First one, most common being nausea and vomiting. Now, if a patient comes to you with nausea and vomiting, you are supposed to get his LFT with enzymes done. On LFT with enzymes, if you observe that the SGOT and the SGPT, that is the AST and ALT levels, enzymes, if they are increased to more than 3 times the upper limit of normal, or they have risen by more than 3 times that of their baseline values at the start of treatment, then it is almost certain that it is because of the ATT-induced hepatitis. If that is proven, first thing you are supposed to do is stop all the 4 drugs. You have to stop the fixed dose combination. Wait for 3 days. Get another repeat LFT done. If you observe a decreasing trend in the SGOT-PT levels, wait further. After you have waited for sufficient amount of time and the LFT with enzymes has stabilized and normalized, then you have to reintroduce these individual drugs individually according to 5, 10, 25, 15 into the weight band as I had explained earlier. However, you are supposed to first introduce ethambutol and isoniazid together. Along with that, you can add one fluoroquinolone, most commonly levofloxacin. So you introduce these 3 drugs together, wait for 3 days, do a repeat LFT with enzymes. If they are within normal limits, you can add rifampicin because you have to gradually introduce the ones which are least hepatotoxic first. You add rifampicin. If rifampicin is tolerated, the patient does not have nausea, vomiting, and the day 3 LFTs after that is normal, then you can finally add pyrazinamide, which is most likely the most common hepatotoxic drug. However, when you add it later, you are supposed to add it in half the dose required. Again, do a LFTs after 3 days. If it is still within normal limits, you can go on to add the entire dose of pyrazinamide and give the full dose of fixed dose treatment again. The next side effect is a rash. Rash is very common. It can be because of any of the 4 drugs, but most likely because of rifampicin. In such a case, you're supposed to prescribe a levocetirizine or an antihistaminic just for 7 days and reassure the patient that it is not a problem and it will settle. Next, bilateral major and minor joint pain and swelling. This is also a very common symptom. Most likely causative agent is pyrazinamide because it has a tendency to cause hyperuricemia and gout, deposition of urate and uric acid crystals in the joints. The treatment is simple. You first get a serum uric acid levels done to confirm it, and second, you treat it by giving either allopurinol 100 milligrams BD or tablet febuxostat, which are both xanthine oxidase inhibitors. That will help solve the problem. Fourth most common side effect is tingling and burning sensation in the soles and palms of feet. This is classical of peripheral neuropathy, which is most likely because of isoniazid. Can be treated by giving prophylactic pyridoxine, which is vitamin B6, or therapeutic pyridoxine, which is 100 milligrams OD dose, while the prophylactic dose is 10 milligrams OD. If any of these side effects occur, which probably they will, you just have to reassure the patient, treat the symptoms, but never stop AKT. It is not like hepatotoxicity, it is not life-threatening. You never stop treatment, just keep continuing to treat the symptoms and reassure the patient. Now, let's talk a little about extrapulmonary TB. Any TB which is not related to the parenchyma, even including the visceral pleura, is considered as extrapulmonary. So the most common form of extrapulmonary TB is tuberculosis pleural effusion. Now, how do you diagnose that? If a patient comes to you with chest pain, dyspnea, and you get a chest X-ray done, and you see a homogeneous opacity on unilaterally with a curve, S-shaped curve of Ellis, you diagnose it as pleural effusion. You do a diagnostic tap, you send it for analysis. If the fluid comes out to be lymphocytic predominant, exudative. Exudative by Light's criteria is defined by when the fluid protein upon the serum protein ratio is more than 0.5, then you know it is exudative. And the adenosine deaminase level of that pleural fluid, when it is more than 40. These 3 are diagnostic criteria of TB pleural effusion. The patient can be started on Cat1 AKT for a total duration of 6 to 9 months. It not necessarily stop at 6 months, it can extend to 9 months. Next, cervical lymph node TB or axillary lymph node TB, any lymph node TB, or a pus or an abscess. Tuberculosis can be found in that too. However, in such a case, first the diagnosis is done by USG, ultrasonography of the local area. You are supposed to look for loss of fatty hilum and areas of central caseous necrosis on USG. It is always advisable to take an excision biopsy rather than just a fine needle aspiration cytology, because an excision biopsy can be sent for CBNAT or the brand name, as it says, Gene Expert, because that will give you whether MTB is detected or no and whether there is sensitivity to rifampicin or no. It is very important for the further treatment management. Cervical lymph node TB usually has a slow indolent course. The treatment usually lasts for 9 months, and you have to keep doing serial sonographies of the locally affected area to see if there is resolution of the size of the lymph nodes with treatment. Usually at the end of 9 months, if there is symptomatic improvement, adequate weight gain, and decrease in the size of the nodes to less than 1 centimeter, sub-centimeter nodes, then it is a criteria for stopping the treatment. Port spine, TB of the vertebral column, that is also a common cause. Again, treatment lasts for around 9 months to 1 year, in which IP phase is always just for 2 months. The extension lies only in the CP phase. IP phase is never extended. Abdominal COX. Abdominal TB can be because of omental lymph node, or it can be because of fallopian tube tumors or ovarian mass. It has to be done on an explorative laparotomy and on excision biopsy of the involved site. Diagnosed by contrast enhanced CT scan of the abdo plus pelvis. Follow-ups have to be taken regularly to see for weight gain, and multiple serial USGs might have to be done to see the decrease in the lymph nodes. Again, you should never forget to do a Gene Expert based on the excision biopsy of the involved site. And last, TB meningitis. Again, diagnosed by classic clinical presentations as well as a lumbar puncture and a CSF leak, a CSF tap, in which exudative CSF plus lymphocytic predominant is taken as the classic diagnostic feature. Usually, in such cases, the patient will be having seizures, altered sensorium, and headache. So, a trial of anti-tubercular treatment plus steroids will have to be given in this patient to manage it totally. The treatment again will usually last for minimum 9 months to maximum 1 year, or it might be extended to 1.5 years also, depending on the patient's response. Thank you for listening to me. With this, I come to the end of my lecture on tuberculosis. I'm grateful if you would like, comment, and share this video so as to promote this website and this beautiful initiative by this group of people. Thank you for your time.